Live from London, this is BBC News. The bodies of 6 people taken hostage by Hamas have been recovered by Israeli forces in a tunnel under the city of Rafah. One of them is an American citizen. The mass rollout of polio vaccines begins in Gaza. Israel and Hamas agreed to 3 localized pauses in fighting. Voters in eastern Germany head to the polls, the far right eyeing big gains in the region, a litmus test for next year's federal election. And airports across 30 European countries go back to their old rulebook, reintroducing carry-on liquid restrictions. Hello, I'm Catherine Biarahanga. We start with breaking news from Gaza. The Israeli military has confirmed that 6 bodies found in a tunnel in the city of Rafah in Gaza were those of hostages held by Hamas after the October the 7th attack. It's named them as Israelis Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushalmi, Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, and Hersh Goldberg Polin, who was an American citizen. He had appeared in a Hamas video with an amputated arm a few months ago. In a statement, President Biden called his death tragic and reprehensible, saying Hamas leaders will pay for their crimes. The Missing Families Forum has again urged the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire for the release of the remaining hostages. With me now is Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic. Mohamed, welcome back to the programme. Over the past couple of hours, we're getting more detail as to how these bodies have been recovered. What can you tell us?
The confirmed detail that we got came from the Israeli army spokesperson when he said that these hostages were bodies were secured from a tunnel in Rafah. This is the same tunnel that the Israeli forces found the earlier alive Israeli hostages last week, Al-Qadi. And he accused Hamas of killing intentionally these hostages. We did not hear yet from Hamas what they have got to say about the circumstances of the death of these hostages. I'm sure in the coming hour or so we will have to hear from them. And the Americans also announced that one of these hostages is an American. And there is now big pressures upon the Israeli government and also big pressures on the United States to try to make the current negotiations that's happening in Doha successful, to make sure that the release of the remaining between 40 and 60 alive Israeli hostages would be happening soon.
Yes, and we've also heard from President Biden, as we said, and he said he'd gotten to know the parents of Hersh Goldberg, Polin, John and Rachel. He said they'd been courageous, wise and steadfast. Just a reminder of how much people have gotten to know the families of some of these hostages and even the stories surrounding how they were taken. For example, Hersh Goldberg Polin, we understand that his arm was amputated. President Biden saying as he tried to help some of the other people caught up in the October the 7th attack. The recovery of bodies like this is really going to have an impact on people in Israel and on the government there.
Indeed, today it has been announced in Israel that the people who are supporting the families of the hostages are going to paralyze the country. We will have to see what is the impact on this in Israel. There were massive demonstrations last night that requesting from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to strike a deal between Israel and Hamas to secure the rest of the hostages. And as you can see from the ages of these hostages, all of them are really young, and it's really a shame.
Yes, thank you very much, Mohamed Taha. Just stay with us and we're just going to find out more, as you say, about the hostages who have now been confirmed to have died. And we can speak to our Middle East correspondent, John Donnison, who joins us from Jerusalem. And I imagine the reaction there, it must be heartbreaking for people in Israel. And we're learning more about the people who have now died, confirmed to have died following the October the 7th attack, these hostages. Just tell us more about what we know about them.
Well, it's heartbreaking, but there's also a lot of anger from the families of the hostages. Let's just go over who the 6 people were. We've got Ori Danino, Eden Yerushlami, Alex Labanov, Almog Sarusi, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, and Carmel Gat. And all of those were captured alive on October the 7th. And we've had a statement from the forum representing hostage families saying that they were in mourning, but they were again very critical of the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying they could all still have been alive if he had pushed harder for a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Now, it's not just the hostage families and many within the Israeli public who've been critical of the government. It's some of Mr. Netanyahu's own ministers. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, says that military operations need to be toned down to allow a hostage release deal to take place. We've had people within the Israeli military saying that the best way to get the remaining hostages out of Gaza, and there are more than 60 thought to be still alive there, is to do a deal. But the Israeli Prime Minister thinks that military pressure is the key to getting these remaining hostages out.
And John, we're just seeing some reports from Israeli media and the Prime Minister's office saying it's cancelling an appearance by the Prime Minister at the opening of the academic year at a school, elementary school in Jerusalem. You mentioned the pressure that he is under to try and reach an agreement with Hamas. What is the status of those talks to reach a ceasefire, but also crucially, the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza?
Well, look, the talks are still ongoing in Cairo with Egyptian, Qatari and American officials trying to work towards this so-called bridging proposal that the Americans have put forward. But Hamas are not even taking part. They say they signed up to an American proposal at the start of July. They agreed to that, but they say that Israel has changed the terms and conditions of the deal. So they're not even taking part at the moment. And they say any idea that progress is being made is an illusion. Now, what they're particularly concerned about is how many Israeli troops remain in Gaza after the first stages of a potential deal. They don't want Israeli troops along the border with Egypt, Gaza's border with Egypt, and they don't want Israeli troops to remain in the corridor that crosses the Gaza Strip and in effect separates the north from the south. So there's no real great sense that a breakthrough is imminent. There is pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu from many people in Israel, but he has not bowed to that pressure as of yet.
He hasn't bowed to that pressure. And John, it's important to ask you about what's happening in the occupied West Bank. I know this is a story that you've been following over the past few days, especially as Israel carries out its military operation in parts of the occupied West Bank. And today we're hearing more developments close to the city of Hebron.
Yes, so much of Israel's military operation has been focused in the north of the West Bank, in cities like Jenin and Tulkarem. But overnight we heard that in the south of the West Bank, around Hebron, which is the biggest Palestinian city in the West Bank, there was a shooting attack, and we understand that 3 Israeli police officers have been killed. So while we've got these developments in Gaza, there is also increasing tension here in the West Bank. We've seen more military activity from the Israelis in the West Bank over the past 4 or 5 days than really we've seen at any time over the last 20 years, certainly in terms of the number of Palestinian cities being targeted by Israeli raids and strikes. Israel says, of course, it is launching counter-terrorism operations and is trying to protect its citizens from the kind of attacks as we've seen in Hebron overnight.
Thank you very much. That's the BBC's John Donniston live in Jerusalem there. We can get more on this from Mohamed Taha, who's still with us in the studio. John mentioning, of course, those developments that we're seeing in Hebron, but also crucially in the city of Jenin. How significant are these developments that we're getting or that we've seen over the past few days in the occupied West Bank?
Very, very serious developments, Catherine. In the last 48 hours, we saw 3 similar attacks on Israeli forces nearby Hebron, in Rosh Etzion, in Karmet Sor, and the recent one in the last hour or so in Tarqumia, where 3 police officers or 3 police personnel, Israeli police personnel, were killed. The attackers escaped the scene. Tarqumia, as we understand, it has got a military tower, it has got 2 settlements, it has got a military base. It's very, very serious that attackers would come and kill 3 police personnel and go back unharmed. The Israeli forces now are besieging the village of Edna nearby Hebron. They understand that the preparators are there. Massive operation. Yes, it's a big operation in Hebron. And the surprising thing is that amongst the massive Israeli military pressures on the north, where Jenin and Tol Karm are, now we see these operations in the south, in Hebron, one of the biggest cities in the West Bank. That means that this operation, massive operation that we didn't see it for 20 years in the West Bank, might continue and might be escalated. The situation now in the West Bank is really, really serious, adding to the situation in Gaza, where around 60 people were killed in the last 24 hours.
So, Mohamed, just talk us through where we stand with this conflict, because, of course, we have these developments, crucial developments that you're talking about in the occupied West Bank. We then also have the separate territory of Gaza, where today the focus is on possible pauses in fighting, and we'll get a chance to discuss that a bit further, but pauses in fighting to allow for a vaccination drive. So it just seems like on one hand you have the scaling up of the conflicts, but on the other, the possibility perhaps that we might see movement towards a break in the fighting.
Practically now is 9 o'clock in Gaza. And 10 minutes past 9 means this humanitarian pause started. We do not know yet if it has been adhered to. We will get information from Gaza, what's happening. But as you did the interview with the UN official area, she said that teams are ready. They were going to do this vaccination, the first round of vaccination. This will stay for more than 10 days. And the polio situation is really serious in Gaza. It is highly infectious. The children started to have paralysis in Gaza. It is fatal. So it is very, very crucial for this pause in fighting to happen, to allow these children to get their vaccination and to be prevented from being paralyzed or die from the disease. At the same time, we hear the news about the bodies of the hostages and the escalation in the West Bank. So in which direction the situation would go? The calm direction, where a deal would happen and the rest of hostages will go back and we see ceasefire, or the escalation both in the West Bank and in Gaza, and the military operation would continue.
Mohamed, thank you. And Mohamed, you'll stay with us and we'll come back to follow all those crucial developments that we're following here on BBC News, the recovery of the bodies of 6 hostages from Gaza by Israeli forces, but also crucially those developments in the occupied West Bank. And as Mohamed and I were discussing, UN officials and local health workers are preparing to roll out a massive vaccination program for polio in Gaza that will rely on a series of limited pauses in fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters. The World Health Organization said it will need to vaccinate at least 90% of children under 10 for the campaign to succeed. Its campaign was organized after a 10-month-old baby was partly paralyzed by the first case of the virus in 2 decades. On Saturday, medics vaccinated children at one hospital in a symbolic move ahead of the official campaign. From Jerusalem, our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell reports.
Just 2 drops. As the UN begins vaccinating against polio in Gaza, a dose is easy to give. But carrying out a mass immunisation campaign in a combat zone is a huge challenge. Parents of the first vaccinated children are relieved.
I was worried and afraid because this is scary, the polio disease. This disease makes the children unable to move.
Baby Abdulrahman was crawling early, but now his mum worries he'll never be able to walk. He was the first child found to have polio in Gaza in 25 years, and it paralysed his leg. Because of the war, he wasn't vaccinated, and now medical care is limited.
Aboud wants to live and be treated. He wants to live and walk like other children. I feel a lot of guilt that he didn't get the vaccination, but I couldn't give it to him because of our circumstances.
Displaced 5 times, the baby's family now lives in a crowded tent camp in Deir Balach in central Gaza. Raw sewage flows through streets nearby. Conditions are ideal for diseases to spread, especially polio, which is highly infectious. Since discovering the virus, UN agencies have been racing to set up an emergency mass vaccination programme. And with war raging, they've negotiated 3 localised 3-day pauses in fighting with Israel and Hamas. UN officials say the plan is not ideal, but it's workable.
What we are aiming at is to have 640,000 children below the age of 10 vaccinated in just a few days in the Gaza Strip. We need to reach at least 90%. Without that, there is a risk that the virus would mutate and that the transmission could continue.
Children make up nearly half the population of Gaza, and the past year has deprived many of their loved ones, their homes and health. With no end in sight to the war, the hope is that at least one new source of suffering can be eliminated. Yolande Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Here's UN spokesperson Louise Wateridge explaining the logistics of vaccinating all those children.
Yes, so I'm joining you from the middle area of the Gaza Strip, and that is where today we are going ahead. The United Nations is starting the vaccination campaign in this area. There are going to be 3 phases of the area of the vaccination campaign. The first is starting here where I am in the middle area. We've got 3 days aligned for this and then an additional catch-up day, a 4th day, to make sure that we try and get all of the children in this area vaccinated, all the children who are under 10 years old. We estimate that's around 156,000 children just in the middle area. So 4 days we have to work to get these children the vaccines. After that, we will move to the southern area of the Gaza Strip. This is in Khan Yunis. Again, 3 days and a 4th day to catch up. Finally, the campaign will go to the north of the Gaza Strip and similar pattern there, where 3 days and the 4th to catch up. We are hopeful that these humanitarian pauses will hold while we're issuing this campaign. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of excitement. Already the teams are mobilizing this morning. They're going to the health centers, they're going to our mobile medical points, and they're ready. So we're very hopeful that we will see some positive news coming from this vaccination campaign in the coming days.
And we know that over the past few months that this conflict has been unfolding, that the healthcare system in Gaza has been devastated, decimated hospitals, clinics. How are you going to manage to carry out this campaign? Do you have the resources? Do you have the staff to be able to implement it?
Yeah, as you say, I mean, I've been to so many health centers here that are completely destroyed, that are damaged. People are working under incredibly unbelievable conditions. You know, some of the hospitals you go to, they smell of blood. They haven't got cleaning products. They haven't got hygiene products. It's really been nothing short of a nightmare for the health staff. But in that same sentence, I can tell you they are the most dedicated people you could ever believe. Really, the healthcare workers who have been working the last 10 months in the Gaza Strip, they are so dedicated to the cause, and it's in them that I trust this campaign will have some success. The facilities, some we've lost, some we cannot access, but these teams are going to be going tent to tent. They're going to be going to mobile medical points. They're really going to do everything they can to make sure they are reaching these children and as many children as possible to get that 90% success rate.
And that was UN spokesperson Louise Wateridge there. Airports